Thanks, Mike. It's great to meet everybody, and it's a pleasure to be here. Um, what I wanted to discuss, what I wanted to discuss, sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to change my slides. There we go. First, what I wanted to do, for those who are not familiar with Amazon Web Services, AWS for a number of years has been helping and working with life science companies and startups to migrate and thrive in the cloud more broadly. And I wanted to discuss more specifically how AI ML is being leveraged by healthcare. And in this talk, I'm going to talk a little bit more about life science companies. As I mentioned, as Mike mentioned, I'm an AI ML specialist solutions architect. I work directly with healthcare and life science companies for thinking about and building AI ML applications, as well as how they are integrated with other larger enterprise applications. What I wanted to discuss, what I'm showing here, by the way, is this is just a selection of global life science and genomics customers across the value chain who are working with AWS or have deployed on AWS. I'm going to discuss a number of these particular examples and in specific use cases in a few slides. Before doing that, though, I did want to first mention, because it kind of provides context of how we see life science companies who are leveraging AI ML. I wanted to discuss the AWS ML Stack. And I'm showing here a diagram of how this works. This is essentially a visualization of the different ways machine learning and artificial intelligence can be used by life science and healthcare companies, and even outside of those industries as well. The top layer are AI services. These are pre-trained models that are hosted by AWS and can be leveraged via a simple API call. The key advantage of these services is that they allow you to quickly and easily use machine learning models without having to build them yourself. Instead, you can just pass your data to them, get back your result, and then your application can move on with what needs to be done. So for example, if we look at Comprehend Medical, Amazon Comprehend Medical can be used for extracting ICD-10 codes, RxNorm codes, now even SNOMED codes, and you just pass your unstructured medical text to it, you get back the result. The key value proposition, to just reiterate, is that you can use these services without having to build AI ML applications yourself. It's just an API call, so developers can leverage them with minimal ML background if they wanted to. The opposite side is the ML frameworks and infrastructure, which allows you to build, train, deploy your own machine learning models where you control everything about the underlying infrastructure. This essentially allows you to build your ML models, but you also have to then maintain and manage that infrastructure. In between these two is the ML services, which comprises largely Sagemaker. Sagemaker allows you to build, train, and deploy your own models with your own data, but allows you to, but essentially Sagemaker then manages the underlying infrastructure for you. Data scientists then can focus on building models and not having to essentially manage EC2 instances. I'm going to discuss a little bit more, but this just provides background because what we see, and this has become a very powerful combination in life sciences, is that you can pick and choose which of these you need to use in different applications, and indeed you can mix and match as needed. So for example, if you have text coming in the form of PDFs, you don't have to build an OCR engine. You can just use Textract and then pass the results to your own custom model, let's say using Sagemaker. So to highlight this, I want to discuss 3 trends that I have seen in the context of life science customers who are leveraging AWS for machine learning. And the 3 trends that I'm going to discuss are basic science at scale. This is essentially how can pharma companies do their science, including basic research, but at scale using AWS. The second trend that I'm going to discuss is how can you do better document processing and search essentially in the context of enterprise search. It's very common that that healthcare and life science companies have lots of documents coming in, but it's not clear how to turn that into actionable insight. And the third topic that I'm going to discuss, the third trend, is automation and semi-automation. And by the way, the way I'm going to discuss this is I'm just going to present a few customer examples in each of these sections. In the video description that's going to be that's going to be on YouTube, I'll contain a link. I'll have links to each of these, so you can choose if you want to read more about them, hear from the customers themselves. I'll have links to all of this in the video description. The first trend that I want to focus on is basic science at scale. And I'm going to present some examples of this. This first example comes from Moderna. And the key problem that they are facing is that when designing mRNA-based therapies, for example, in the context of the COVID vaccine, but in many others now, there can be multiple RNA sequences and structures that in theory can be produced, but that space, that search space is gigantic. It's not possible to synthesize and test every single potential construct. So a key problem that's faced from a machine learning perspective is, given this very large space, choosing which construct to build and test is a high priority. And you have to choose which of these to do. And the factors of this is, obviously you want a construct that's effective, but it also has to be the most stable and easily to chemically develop. The key impact of this is that it improved turnaround time, increased mRNA quality, and decreased costs. And again, a theme I want to emphasize is that AI here is allowing for much more rapid basic science at scale. And a key point here that I want to emphasize is that scientists are integrated with this AI. It's not a pure just AI algorithm. Scientists are doing their work leveraging AWS infrastructure and also leveraging AI in that context. Here also I want to note a point, which is they're using EC2 spot instances, which allow them to essentially spin up infrastructure as needed at a lower cost. The next example that I wanted to discuss, also in the context of basic sciences, comes from Relay Therapeutics. The problem that they faced, is that when seeing which molecules might inhibit a protein, which I'm schematically showing in this diagram, you have a docking engine that performs docking of small molecules in a large molecule. Searching that space also can be very complex, and doing this at scale can be extremely difficult because you need essentially a lot of compute. What Relay Therapeutics, and their goal is essentially to filter down potential molecule candidates to 100 or 200 compounds that are most likely to bind the biological target. The way I'm showing this here schematically is you have small molecule candidates. Some of these, for example, the green one has a very high score. Others, like the square, would have a low score. What Relay Therapeutics was able to do is leverage EC2 and AWS Batch to scale up to a 10 billion molecules that can be computationally screened for fitting the binding site. And this allows them to spin up to, let's say, 100,000 cores in their particular use case, and can be completed within 24 hours. This is a huge, this is a prime example, I would say, of basic science at scale, because you're essentially scaling your docking engine to now scale up to essentially arbitrarily large workloads. And importantly, I want to emphasize, these cores are then can auto scale, so that you can scale up when you need and then scale down when you don't need them to be used, which saves on costs as well. The impact here is that, as I just mentioned, you can easily scale to the required number of CPUs for each virtual screen. Their estimated cost reduction was by 50%. And importantly, from a scientific perspective, Relay Therapeutics said that noted that this had an increased hit rate compared to a common alternative, which is just a purely experimental high throughput screen. The next example that I wanted to note comes from Celgene. This is in the context of analyzing images of cancer cells, which the images may include both normal as well as tumor cells. And it's extremely laborious to label these either by hand or older image analysis algorithms will frequently misclassify and mislabel the cells. So the solution that Celgene converged on was leveraging Amazon SageMaker and Apache MXNet within the context of SageMaker for building and training these models. So essentially, by leveraging SageMaker for training the models, you can now have deep learning models that are deployed on SageMaker and allow for higher accuracy labeling of the different cells within the images. From a scaling perspective, the impact here is that they can scale up to the required number of CPUs for each virtual screen. And this particular analysis was also important for better toxicology predictions. Again, I want to emphasize, just to kind of summarize this particular section, uh, when you think of basic sciences, whether that's docking or image analysis of cancer cells or optimizing constructs in the context of Moderna, but really the lesson of this is any scientific problem, when you think about how can this scale, I don't want to do this just on one computer, but I need to do this on 100,000 instances. AWS provides the ability to do this. You can bring your own code, you can bring your own images if you want to, and scale up and scale out those scientific experiments. The next trend that I've seen that I want to discuss is intelligent document processing and search. And you might kind of ask, well, what does this have to do with the context of basic sciences? But I want to provide an example that comes from Gilead. And before discussing, I want to actually note context here, which is what I've seen, and I think that anyone in the audience probably will identify, is that when you're doing scientific research, you spend a lot of time searching for things, looking for things. This is true not just in scientific research, but really in any job. You're spending a lot of data looking for things. You might be looking for a particular piece of information that may be buried within many papers, or you may just even be looking for what floor is IT located on. The ability to scale search and do search properly and efficiently is essentially a multiplier and allows anyone in your company to do their job better. This example comes from Gilead. Gilead leveraged Kendra as well as other of the AI ML services to bring data together from many different enterprise systems and allow for quick, efficient search. To dig a little deeper in this, their particular use case is to bring data together from different enterprise systems across essentially the entire organization. This includes regulatory compliance, as I'm showing here, also supply chain, manufacturing. The goal is to get better insight, and I want to emphasize, allow people to do their jobs better by searching in a more efficient fashion. The solution here leverages Amazon Kendra. Kendra is an AI ML service that allows for enterprise search. Essentially, you can connect it to your documents. Kendra comes with a number of built-in connectors to many different sources. Kendra will then ingest those documents, and then you can start asking, I want to emphasize, natural language questions of your data. Even if a person has no technical background, they don't have to ask questions via like SQL or something like that. They just type in their question. Questions like, to give simple examples, what are symptoms of diabetes? And then Kendra will come back with the answer, as well as locations of which documents have this data. I want to also emphasize that this is not just using Kendra out of the box. Gilead is also using Textract to extract data from things like images, PDFs, etc., as well as SageMaker for building their own models. I want to emphasize this point as well, because this is an important trend that I think we're seeing more and more in healthcare and life sciences, which is traditionally data can be locked in either to images, or even if they're not images, if there's something like PDFs, search can be very, very difficult. What Gilead is doing, and I think that this is a trend that's going to continue more and more, is they're leveraging Textract, which is an AI ML service provided by AWS that can be used for essentially, you can think of it as advanced OCR, but powered by deep learning. So if your data is trapped within tables that are in images or even just handwritten notes, you can use Textract to extract that text, essentially enrich your document with that metadata and then search that. This is an important concept because it, in theory, allows users to now search not just over plain text, but even within images if done properly. The key impact here is reducing manual data management by approximately 50%, and they were able to build the data lake, within 9 months, and the search tool within 3 months. Again, I want to emphasize that while you might think that this is not basic science, and on some level it's not purely, this is a huge workforce multiplier that allows basic scientists to do their job. This is another example, a similar type of example coming from 3M. When scientists need to do more research, they need to access information from prior relevant research. And finding information can be very difficult. As anyone in the audience who is looking for papers or remembers that they something from a paper, but they can't remember where, this is a type of problem that directly feeds into this. The solution here was to use Amazon Kendra to allow allow scientists in general to find the information they need rapidly, quickly, and efficiently. Again, Kendra, I would say a trend that I'm seeing is a backbone for lots of these types of enterprise search in the context of healthcare and life sciences broadly, as well as scientists more specifically. And again, the impact of this is that engineers and researchers can find the information that they need much faster by just simple natural language queries. And I want to emphasize that this is a step beyond what we've seen in the past, let's say 5 years ago, of simple keyword search. Simple keyword search still, of course, has its place, and there are a number of ways you can architect that. But there's been a lot of advances in natural language processing over the past 5 years. As I'm sure the audience is aware, the rise of transformers are a key trend in this, so that services like Kendra can allow for better natural language search. The third theme that I want to discuss is automation and semi-automation. This is a trend that we're seeing in, I think, broadly in AI ML, but specifically in life sciences and healthcare. I want to emphasize that this theme somewhat intersects with basic science at scale, and also intelligent document processing and search. But automation is a key problem because a tremendous problem that's faced both on the enterprise scale, but also for smaller companies, is that human beings have to do work. And every task that you give a human to do, if they could be doing something that's more worthwhile, that would be even better. So a worthwhile problem that I've seen all life science companies are thinking about is, can a process be automated? And importantly, if it can't be fully automated, can it be semi-automated? When I say semi-automation here, and we'll talk about this as well, it's a recognition of the fact that machine learning models are absolutely not perfect, and automating a process that requires human intervention is a mistake. But we frequently see that you can semi-automate a process where, for example, humans are involved with understanding key cases that maybe the machine learning algorithm is not quite there yet, or high profile cases. And I'm going to show a few examples of this. This example comes from Amgen. And again, all of these, I'll have links to these in the YouTube video description. This example comes from Amgen, where very broadly, pharmaceutical companies are responsible for reporting adverse drug events to the FDA, generally within a 24-hour window. This is a complex problem frequently because you might get adverse event reports from all kinds of locations. They might be in a phone call. They might be in unstructured text. So getting this to a stage where even detecting the adverse drug event can be challenging, and recognizing this is an adverse drug event, how can we, and then using that to report can be complicated. The solution here was leveraging Transcribe Medical as well as custom modeling using natural language processing. And the classification algorithm that was built ultimately leads to both fast and accurate identification of adverse events, greater than 95% accuracy. And I want to go back to the theme that I've said. This is assisting manual assessments by increasing accuracy. And this is a prime example that, and I'll show a few others, processes that are AI powered need not be perfect to help in your business use case. In this particular example, this is assisting manual assessment because it's essentially scaling the process and removing the adverse event detection from a purely manual process to a semi-automated process. Here's another example. This comes from AstraZeneca, where they were essentially attempting to do kidney injury assessment. You can see on the right an example of this where you have glomeruli that may be within the kidney that maybe have severe damage or moderate damage or nothing. And the problem that they were facing is that this was a purely human-driven process at first, where pathologists are essentially looking at these images and labeling them and making decisions. By using Amazon SageMaker for labeling this, as well as for performing the classification, this essentially is scaling what used to be a purely human-driven process to give faster scientific insight, as well as removing that human-based bottleneck. And I want to emphasize an important lesson from here also, which is in most cases, machine learning algorithms need to have labeled data in order to make intelligent insight. I want to be careful, which is that isn't always true, but in many cases, like object recognition, it is. So having a scalable process like AstraZeneca did for labeling objects, and this is also available within the context of SageMaker to label your data, allows for scalable and more reproducible machine learning results. The next example comes from Novartis. Novartis, and this is an example that was a collaboration with AWS, and it's a very large project, which is the business need is to make upstream supply chains, manufacturing processes, distribution more visible, predictable, efficient, as well as detecting when errors might be happening. This is an important problem that we're seeing in the context of automation and semi-automation, which is machine learning is being used to transition processes from being reactive to being proactive. In the context here, just to give an example with manufacturing, rather than saying, hey, this machine failed, how can we fix this in the future? A better approach, and AWS has services for this, and you can build your own models, is actually going to be proactive. Can we forecast that this machine will fail? If so, what action should be taken? In the context of Novartis, this is using a plethora of AWS services. I'm showing some here. QuickSight, for example, for analytics, custom modeling using SageMaker. And importantly, I want to emphasize intersection between IoT and these models, IoT's Internet of Things, is very important. In the context of manufacturing, if you want ultra low latency insight, you're frequently going to have to deploy your models on edge to specific devices. And using this insight center, in the context of machine learning models allows for better forecasting, better operational insight, and importantly, at every stage of the process, making predictions and leveraging AI ML as much as possible. I want to emphasize one more thing in this example, which is that, and this is a common problem that we're seeing more and more, and I would say a broader trend, AI ML in most cases, especially, complex cases, is not just AI ML. It's AI ML in the context of larger applications. So in this particular example, they're using a local historian for tracking data. You might be leveraging, like shown here, Kafka as a queue. You're going to be using IoT. QuickSight I mentioned already for analytics, Athena for on-the-fly querying of data in S3. EMR, Elastic MapReduce, can be used for spinning up and down clusters for distributed querying and analysis of data. AI ML in large applications for this is generally not going to be just AI ML. It's going to be AI ML integrated with many other applications, and thinking about how to architect that in the context of automation and semi-automation requires thought around each particular use case. Another example for automation that I wanted to discuss is Janssen, which is part of Johnson & Johnson. The business use case here is that Janssen wanted to automate its machine learning model deployments and general workflow to aid in an automated fashion. The problem here, and those data scientists in the audience, I'm sure you identify with this, is that if you have a pipeline, a naive way of doing things is that every once in a while or once a week or something like that, data scientists go in, re-execute pipelines as needed, either when being told to do so or or when they feel that it's the right time to do so, or on a schedule. But in this context, and I think that this example highlights this, Janssen did, an automated ML operation that essentially improved accuracy and importantly is fully automated and can occur on a schedule. Essentially, feature engineering is done automatically, and processes that used to be a data scientist essentially every once in a while executing the pipeline step by step. Instead, and in this particular context, they're leveraging step functions, are being done in an automated fashion. The impact of this is increased speed of data prep by 600%, feature engineering by 700%, and model accuracy of models is now increased by 21%. I want to emphasize this, and not to get too far afield, but ML orchestration and proper ML ops is a key concept that I like to emphasize, and I'm seeing as a trend in the context of automation and semi-automation in AI ML. If you're architecting AI ML workloads, you should be thinking about questions like this of, I have a model now, but how do I automate retraining as new data comes in? A number of AWS orchestration tools, like what I just mentioned, step functions, but there are many others. AWS also has a managed Airflow service. You can use Airflow. There are a number of different services that can be used for orchestration of ML, and using those as soon as your model is deployed is a key concept in the context of automation, so that problems like, as data comes in, how do we retrain? That can be solved by automation. How do I retrain on, not, let's say, as new data comes in, but on a schedule, so that we retrain every 2 months? Or, for example, data will come in periodically that we don't need to retrain on, but instead we need to pass this through a model to get predictions. All of this, which are processes that are still sometimes done manually by data scientists, now can be done in a purely automated fashion, or in the very least, a semi-automated fashion by data scientists. And I want to emphasize in this context that orchestration tools like step functions and others as well provide visibility to data scientists so that they can keep track of what's going on, so that if something fails or maybe a model performance is not quite where it should be, they can stop the deployment. It's not being auto-deployed unless they choose to do so. Another example I wanted to discuss, this is a little bit further away from life sciences, but I did want to mention it. This comes from Q Squared Solutions, where in their business use case, clinical research organizations have to purchase lab tests for clinical trials. These can be very long documents, and if you fail to buy a test that needs to be bought, then that's going to delay the clinical trial. In the context of this particular solution, they leveraged Textract, Comprehend Medical, as well as Sagemaker to build their own custom models as well. I want to emphasize this again. This is a semi-automated process because this is extracting entities, but of course, a human being is involved as well with thinking about this. But the impact of this is a 50% reduction in workload when analyzing the clinical trial documents. And I want to emphasize one more point here. I showed previously the AI ML services stack, the 3-layered stack that I showed before of AI services, SageMaker, and ML frameworks and infrastructure. You can pick and choose which of these to use. So in this particular example, using Textract and Comprehend Medical, but then your own models within SageMaker. These kinds of decisions can help speed up your deployment of AI ML workloads, because you can choose when to use an AI service for certain contexts, as well as your own models for other contexts, and focus on what the core science is for you. So with that, those are the examples that I wanted to show. This is for sure not an exhaustive list of how AI is being used in healthcare and life sciences. But again, in the video description that you'll see below, I'll provide a link. I'll provide links to each of these use cases, and you can go online as well and see other AWS success stories in the context of healthcare life sciences and AI ML. Again, thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Joshua, thank you a lot. I cannot hear you. Why?
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks a lot for your speech. It was great, a lot of amazing examples. And we have several questions. Just a second. So one of them is from 3 parts. So I'll read it out, and I hope that the person will get the most from your reply. What is the role of AI ML in drug discovery? Mainly, can AI take over drug design in a more efficient manner than med chemists can do it today? Is there a forecast as to when this may occur? What would you say?
Yeah, that's a very broad question and a great
Yeah.
question. So I think it's definitely been true that AI ML is playing a larger and larger role in key components of drug discovery. My experience that I'm seeing is that that AI ML models are, and specifically deep learning, are making deeper and deeper inroads. And of course, I'm not the first to say this. This has been said many, many times. In many, many cases, that were previously not AI ML. Just to give one obviously famous example, AlphaFold has been used with tremendous success for protein structure prediction. And since protein structure prediction is essential for targeting molecules that don't have a crystal structure, that kind of workload is obviously going to be essential in the pipeline of drug discovery. Other processes, for example, I mentioned docking. There are many inroads with deep learning and machine learning in general into docking, whereas traditional methods are, more not necessarily using machine learning or are based on geometries or statistical potentials, things like that. Deep learning, I would say, in the next 5 years, there's going to be potentially more inroads of how machine learning is being applied at each and every step. I want to emphasize it's not going to necessarily completely abrogate all manual processes. Of course, experimental validation has to be done, but I think that AI ML is going to continue to play more and more of a role in that context. I hope that answered the question. You said this was a 3-part question, so I'm happy to take the next part.
Yeah, actually, this was the 3 parts already.
Mm.
So yeah, we have another question. Let me get it. What, according to you, Joshua, needs to be the government's and state authorities' role in accelerating machine learning in life science and biotechnology?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to be, a bit careful about this. So more broadly, what I'm going to speak about in that context is patient privacy, which I think is obviously a huge concern, not just from the government, but pharmaceutical companies are thinking about this as well. The FDA actually released new standards for compute in the context of the pharmaceutical industry and in computing. A key problem here, and again, I want to not just focus on the government, but generally, is how to ensure proper patient privacy in the context of life sciences. It's essential that pharma companies have the correct privacy when they're analyzing genomic data, non-genomic data, healthcare data. Where is PHI in their data? Has it been properly removed where necessary? If it's not necessary to remove it for an application, is it being properly stored? AWS provides a number of different use cases, of guidance of how to do this. But I would say that, pharma companies in general and everybody has to be constantly concerned about ensuring that patient privacy is correctly done and deployed and executed on all of their workloads.
Thank you. Thank you for the answer. We have more. Just a second. A lot of scientific documents, they actually have like a copyright on the information they provide and the intellectual property. Is there any way like of using those kind of information in the research?
So it obviously depends on the nature of the copyright, and it depends what you're doing. So, obviously if it's against the copyright to ingest a document and do search on it, you can't necessarily do so. But what I wanted to emphasize, in the examples that I showed about enterprise search, these are generally being used on proprietary data. So I want to take this question and emphasize an even simpler point, which is pharma companies are implementing better search on their own proprietary data. They might have previous research that they know exists and is siloed somewhere, but no one can search it because search capabilities have not been done. So whether that's ingesting their own internal documents, ingesting, proprietary research, these types search services like Kendra are allowing for better proprietary search on these proprietary documents as well. Second to this, many papers are published and are essentially open access. Better search over these kinds of documents it also enables research as well.
Thank you. Let's take one more, just a short one. We have another speaker coming in a minute. So the question is, are the AWS service free or fee, and can Amazon keep some part of total information for themselves when I generate, analyze, or store the data using AWS platform? It's the question from Raj.
Sure. So when you bring your data to AWS, you own it. It's your data. And that's true for, like, let's say you're building your own ML models or you're doing anything else with your data. When you're using the AI ML services, so you pass your data to the service and you get back the result. Each service is, of course, a bit different, and it was asked whether they're fee or free. Some of them are free tier available or eligible, but the different services, there is a cost associated with using each one. How each one is billed obviously depends on the particular service, but I did want to emphasize many of the AI ML services are free tier eligible. In terms of AWS leveraging your data, this depends a bit on the service. Some of the services, AWS does leverage a bit of the data to improve the service. You can opt out of this, though, by choosing to opt out in writing if you wanted to. That's for some of the services, and other of the services, excuse me, like Comprehend Medical, completely do not leverage any data at all that you pass to it to improve the service. They're essentially they're essentially REST APIs that the data comes in, the response comes out, and then nothing is saved on the AWS side. But I wanted to more generally emphasize that as you bring your data to AWS, you have control over what region, you have control over how it's used, and you own that data.
So basically all the data which AWS receives are protected and used only by the owner of this data, right?
Exactly.
Thank you. I would ask more questions, but unfortunately we have our schedule. Joshua, would you share your contacts to the audience that they would send some questions to you directly?
Yeah.
We can also add them to the description of this live stream.
Absolutely.
So yeah, everybody will be able to find Joshua's contacts and send him the direct email, whatever worries this person. And we're going to the second speaker. Thank you,
Nice to
Joshua.
meet.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a pleasure hosting you. I hope that we will meet very soon again.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Nice to meet everybody, and thank you, Mike, for inviting me. And it was a pleasure to be here.